Hello, everyone. Niklas should be able to join us in these amazing digital times, live from free climbing somewhere. I think he's with us.
Yeah, I'm currently out in the woods, having a birthday party next door as well. So
perfect. Yeah, we basically are going to talk quite a bit about doing Megagames online, basically. We ran 2 versions of Den of Wolves that we called the Discord Quarantine Edition. Basically, we're going to try to dissect the sort of topic of Megagame Immersion versus Spreadsheets in space, which is something that we grappled with quite extensively during our sort of process in getting the first version online, and then it was a better version for the second run. But first up, why did we do this? So, as you all sort of remember, and probably a key takeaway from Jim's talk just now is doing games on events that personally affect you. I think we've all been personally affected by the COVID-19 thingy. I don't think anyone listening has been missing out on what's been going on. And it's been going on differently in different countries with different types of restrictions, but restrictions nonetheless. And no mega games have been put on or played, or not in the, as John Meisen would put it, the flesh version. So flesh mega games have not been a thing. And that there was this point in time where parts of the world shut down before others. The UK kept on trucking along for longer than most other countries, and we didn't really know what was going on. But there came a point in time where everyone started cancelling their games left, right, and centre across the globe. And I remember being quite discouraged by this. It was not fun, just week after week, just trying to assess the situation, trying to abide to government recommendations. Here in Sweden, we're not allowed to meet more than 50 people, but that wasn't really the problem. You can run a game that has less than 50 players, but the general vibe was that people really wanted to take this thing seriously and not play games. So basically, what could we do? I was quite discouraged. Yeah, basically, I took like a day off social media, took a day off news and everything, and then decided I'd need to do something. I phoned up Niklas the next day and said, we need to do something. And he just replied that I was just waiting for your call. I've set all this stuff up. Let's have a look at it. Could it be done? Basically, how do we go from this, which is a full sensory thing, to doing this, which is not a full sensory thing, quite a different thing altogether? How do you do that when you absolutely have to do it without losing the finer details of what makes this something interesting? And how can you sort of get the passion of this whilst doing this? And I'm not the passionate guy about this sort of stuff. I'll leave that up to Niklas to try and explain.
Well, the spreadsheet thing is the passionate thing. I basically live inside spreadsheets normally, and when we were looking at like the setup and everything, it's a lot of the like communications and how to keep track of everything. So we tried to make it like simple, easy for people to understand what we're doing. I mean, most people have been inside an Excel sheet or in a Google sheet sometimes in life, so it's just easy for people to understand what's going on, like information and structure wise. Even though like when you look at it, it's a spreadsheet. You just get happy as soon as you open it.
So yeah, we have different outlooks on that, but the key point is trying to convey something, a feeling And really, it comes down to having the sort of weigh the pros and cons of the different formats and try to do something that makes sense. And we chose Den of Wolves not only because it's a well-known title. We could have picked something else, and probably most likely because people were starved to do sort of anything online in a mega game format. We could have picked any title, but I think Den of Wolves lends itself really well to the sort of solitude of space. You're in your sort of own little thing, but you're interacting with other people and that sort of stuff. But what we really wanted to try and emulate is to sort of give each ship some personality, give each player a sense of purpose, a sense of place in this world. Some of the stuff that most sort of players do, or at least some players do, that really adds to the atmosphere of a regular flesh mega game, is just like getting in the mood, dressing up to some extent, or at least acting in character, and that's something that we wanted to encourage. But you can do stuff online that you can't do. You can't place yourself in an actual spaceship and do news from an actual spaceship. So there are sort of immersion points, or where online is really it really excels the sort of things you can do in a limited physical space. But some things that struck us as things you need to focus on: rules of conduct. They're sort of implicit rules on how you interact with people in a physical room. And when that's turned on its head, and you need to sort of do that in a digital space, you need rules of conduct, how to interact with other people. That's not self-evident. It's not a simple thing to do. And we spent a couple of pages of text trying to explain that, and then have a bunch of control help people do that. It's not an easy thing to do. We also found that having the ability to pause is essential when doing an online mega game, because you're stuck in a chair. You're not moving around a physical room. I don't know how many steps you get from playing a mega game, but quite a few, I'd imagine. But you get pretty much 0 steps and 0 sort of movement, or like deep breaths going into a digital mega game. So allowing for pauses, and also the limited interaction points that you have, as you are a single unit that can only interact with another single unit or a cluster of units. You can't see the entire room. You can't hear what's going on. I saw a comment passing by here that somebody was really enjoying the birds chirping in the background of Niklas' audio feed. That sort of stuff you get in a regular mega game. You see people passing by. You see the look of somebody's face as somebody is explaining something to them across the room. All that stuff you're missing. So turn time wise, we got the feedback that the turns weren't long enough, and the game could have gone on for even longer. A lot of players said that like five hours playing this could have easily been 8 hours, because you don't tire as easily, and your attention is sort of not all over the place. But that's down to different folk, different strokes, I guess. Another key issue is having, as you have single interaction points, you really need something that holds the whole narrative together, and the role of the press becomes even more important in an online game in order to have any sort of coherent storyline or anything like that. So we were blessed with absolutely cracking news team for both our games, but it did require the full attention of 5 players for each game to have that sort of thing, and it was greatly appreciated. I don't think the games would have ran as successfully without having that. You also have the chance to have control interact with each other and update each other on what's going on in the game, which is something that is very hard to do in a regular game. and now we move on to sort of the key issues, key design choices, where things are now rapidly moving in different directions. And for here, this is mostly going to be Niklas talking about the key issues of having the sort of human versus machine design choices of game design, etc. But I just need to say that we very much went for the adapting regular mega game for online play. That was the design choice that we made, because you can design a game for online play and use all these pros of being in the online environment. We didn't do that. We really wanted it to be something that you can do while we wait the pandemic out and can start playing games normally again. But there is a lot to be said about how we did that. I'm just going to my messy mind in a sort of very messy picture, but just to show that we tried. Each orange circle here is a physical place in a physical room, and how do you interact when you can't really move. So this is sort of a flow chart of how would things work, what are the interaction points, etc. But the key thing here is like you can slap a nice design on a spreadsheet and have it come out as something else. And Niklas will probably tell you more about that. But a key component here is allowing for human error, because that is a huge part of interacting with other people. There's a point to why the shuttles in Den of Wolves, for those of you who have played it, they're not handled by control. It's nothing that's being sorted out automatically. There's a clear human element of logistical challenges and things getting lost on the way. And how do you design without taking that away? I'm going to leave it to Niklas to try and explain.
Yeah, so when we were looking at the technical solutions for everything, the core thing that we're after is, if we look at like meat mega games or flesh mega games, the general idea is that the rules are always flexible. You need to change them during game time. People are doing wizard wheezes, stuff are happening. You end up in situations you couldn't account for before you started the game. So I had to make sure that the system was as flexible as possible. And for anyone who's tried to design a computer program, flexibility is hard, because the more flexibility you have, the more points there are that the system will break. So we actually had a philosophy of it, like, don't make it a digital mega game, just make it a mega game in a digital environment. So we had the spreadsheets, and the first run we had it, there was basically no automations whatsoever. We had some drop-down menus and some automatic coloring, but all the resources were handled by control. All the shuttle transfers, everything, like, it's always just copy pasting between different spreadsheets, which is a big hassle. But it also made it possible that whatever ended up happening, we as players or we as control could handle the situations and amend for it. So and in the second run, we started looking at, okay, what were the issues, and the resources were the main issue of it. I think you can move on to the next slide. Because when we talk in a digital environment, the physical objects that you have, and the thing that you have tokens, you have money, you have all those kind of bits and pieces in as a physical object, is really easy to keep track of. You can't automatically create more tokens. You could fetch it from a control table, but if you lose a token, it's lost, or if you give it to someone else, they have it. All those kind of transfers in a digital environment is something that is much, much harder. And I mean, you can see it in accounting systems when you're trying to keep track of money. That's a complicated matter. We're trying to make a slim version of that, and also make sure that you can change the system on the fly if you need to without something breaking. So in this, we wanted okay, how can we give an attachment and make people understand the different physical objects? So all the crew and ships and everything, we had the players give them names. And that is definitely one of the things that made it easier. And it also created stories for them. So people started to talk about the different tokens as the persons they represented, instead of just I give you my pilot. It's rather I give you this pilot. So that pilot is on your ship, so we know it's over there. And that is that's the biggest struggle. So and when we're looking at like doing new mega games, the resource management is something that we put about like 80% of the technical time. How we're going to sort this out, how we're going to make sure that the resources are transferred in a correct way, how to make sure that people and it's not from a we think that people cheat. It's just that we make sure that people know what to do and how to do stuff without doing errors, because it's so easy to make an error when it's just numbers on a screen. So for a second setup, when we had Google Forms instead. So you did all the transfers as Google Forms, you submitted it, and all of that is then calculated. So we had like a back-end spreadsheet. So I did some really nasty formulas for it, which is something that I don't want to show because it's you shouldn't have those kind of formulas, but it worked. And it was really easy to amend, and it also meant that instead of doing like copy pasting, and we had a complete log of all the resource transfers. So if anything were to be weird, we could always just change it. You can take the next slide then. So and from like the thing that we learned, especially from the first one to second, is like economy and transactions, which I talked about. It's also like cards and how hard it is to manage cards in where you don't have it physically. Like if so, we sorted out as players like for each ship instead of each players, and then players can keep track of it in there. You can take it away, Johan.
Yeah. There's also these sort of preconceptions of digital games. What do you expect from a digital game, which is also something that we struggle with, sort of expectations management in flesh mega games, where especially people who come for the first time, but even more so for the people who come for the second time. Those are usually the people who are sort of in a make it or break it situation, because there's something about the first time you go to a mega game that you like, and then you sort of expect that thing to repeat itself the next time you go, and you might have picked a game that is completely different. Your first game might have been a very sort of resource heavy logistical operations game, and then you enter into something that is more of a fantasy negotiation game, which is something completely different and maybe a lot more LARPy than board gamey. And that there's a lot to be said about the preconceptions, especially when it comes to streamlining and automation. And like I said before, we designed the shuttles in Den of Wolves to emulate the problems that you get with shuttles when they're handled as a jar full of tokens, basically handled by a player moving around the room. And we've had, for the physical runs of Den of Wolves that we've had, there's always been a shuttle gone missing, or somebody pocketed that token, or that sort of stuff. And whilst that is borderline breaking the rules, it also creates interesting interactions of stuff going missing and things happening under stress. But I think between adapting for digital and designing for digital, you can design systems that are robust, but you need to do that in a way that, just like Jim said before, that where player agency trumps process. Because if you design a super slim a streamlined thing where logistics are automatically handled, it doesn't emulate the sort of the challenges of humans interacting and trying to exchange stuff. There is a lot to be said about the interaction points and what to streamline and what not to streamline. We all like nice things and looking at nice things. There is something to say about that. there's also the sensory challenges of the format. You being stuck sort of in your home by your screen, and it does take a lot of control and a lot of game design to get every player engaged throughout a 5-hour game when you have single interaction points between players or players in control. It's also, I think, will be interesting to see going forward when we start blurring the line between human and machine. And I agree with what Becky said before. We're probably going to see games where what we now do online for maybe a couple of months more, that started to leak back into the flesh games when we start having them again, probably this fall or something, depending on, a bunch of things that I can't control. And really challenge the immersion part of what a mega game is. I think it will be really interesting to see the incorporation of technology as a consequence of having games moved online. There's quite a few interesting techniques that you can use, and I think having had to do mega games online, I think a lot has been moved forward into the future with the acceptance of technology and what you can do. And that's pretty much it for us. We'll leave it over to moderator to take us away with questions.
All right. Yeah, if people can start putting their questions into the question channel. Wow. Okay, that's already some in. So first question from Jim. Did you consider, or would you consider in the future, using existing tools like Vassal or Roll20?
We used Roll20 to do the sort of map game and moving tokens and that stuff. I don't know if Niklas wants to elaborate on that.
No, well, basically we did all the combat and all the we actually needed tokens and move them around in Roll20 since it's perfect for it. But we also, because we had a discussion if we wanted to have all the ships and do shuttle transfers and on there as well. We were looking at okay, this is an addition and just solving a specific part of the system. But definitely, I think Roll20 is a great addition to it. But you need to keep in mind that since it's a separate system, you need to have separate accounts, and there's some additional setup for it.
All right, great. So there's a question from Rob. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to answer. What is a mega game?
It's the eternal struggle.
Fair enough. So a question from Kieran. Do you think that the multiple streams of text channels, voice channels, and spreadsheets, do you think having all of those made the game more or less engaging?
Ooh.
If it helps, Kieran mentions that he, in particular, liked being able to, read one thing while being able to talk about another.
Yeah, there is that one thing of having text logs of everything, and you can go back and having. I know Niklas is particularly fond of the transaction logs for the shuttles, so you can see who've moved what piece to where in the game, which is interesting when things start popping up. There were some really interesting interaction points in the second run where one of the wolf agents, one of the traitors, took a shuttle, filled it up with jet fuel, and headed straight for the Aegis. And at the same time, on board the Aegis, they could see the ship approaching in a way that you would not do. It was a sort of slow-mo kind of thing. Whereas in the Flesh mega game, the agent would just have gone over to the table and say, "I'm crashing into this ship." And there was this slowed down. I think it took about 15 minutes of there being a panic on the Aegis, them trying to figure out what was on the shuttle. Initially, they were going to shoot it down. Then they found out all this fuel was there because they looked at logs. And there was a lot of going back and forth and trying to figure out what to do in a sort of very tense moment. The sort of thing you can only do like in action movies where a minute can take 15 minutes to resolve. That was really interesting. I'd say it all depends on. We insisted that everyone who played had played either Den of Wolves or any mega game before, so you have the sort of preconceptions of what is a mega game, which is something that you have to define for yourself, Rob. But you have the preconception of what to expect from any mega game, and then you won't have as much sort of misconceptions about what it is to play a game online.
Right, thanks for that. We have a question from Becky. What other existing mega games do you think would convert particularly well to the online format, or any that you think would be particularly bad for it?
I'll let Niklas start.
Well, we joked about taking Crisis in Elysium and go nuts, having thousands of cards and everything. But to be fair, since resources are the things that I'm most worried about. So as long as they have easier resource management system, then those would be preferred for me. I haven't played as many games as you have, Johan. But I think both Watch the Skies would be great. The only problem there is having people bribe each other, but we'll have to sort that out some way. But I think that would be something to start at least.
Yeah, I'd say the same. I think one of the things that was really interesting about running Den of Wolves was that you have that the team structure is really solid, save for the sort of traitor mechanic. You have teams, and we tried really hard to get people from the same megagaming background, or megagaming culture rather. So you get people who are used to playing a lot of games in London, they were on the same team. People who are used to playing a lot of games together in the US or in Australia or Sweden or the other Scandinavian countries, it will try to put them together so you get a way of playing the game that is unique to that team, which was really interesting. And that is something you can only do online. And I think that will lend itself particularly well to Watch the Skies. There are a bunch of stuff because we've been talking about this, obviously, there's a bunch of stuff to sort out that tries to handle player agency and allowing for human error and human interaction. But I think any game that's heavy on talking and less heavy on you, I'd say any game where you're supposed to be stood by a map watching slowly as events unfold with minimal interaction with other players. I know a lot of people like those sort of wargamey games, but I think that becomes a bit solitary when you do it online. I think the pace might be too slow and the interactions might not be that interesting. But anything that has a lot of interaction and a lot of story would lend itself well to the online format.
All right, and then so the last big question, I'll take this one from John. When doing these games online, do you think that there's value in using more real-time mechanics rather than keeping to strictly turn-based mechanics in an online mega game?
That is a super interesting question. The ability to change the sort of pace of time is something that I think is underrated or underused in mega games in general. It happens without players noticing, specifically in sort of narrative-driven games like Everybody Dies, or I think Den of Wolves as well, but where a turn is not a set amount of time. It is interesting to have turn-based things, but I think you need to have things happen between the turns. I know there's this, I think it's John's Game actually, that had a playtest recently where you do stuff and then you step away to do other stuff and then you come back and continue to move things on a map. I think I think there's a lot to be said about real-time mechanics versus turn-based, just as there is in any sort of online strategy game where you can sort of pause the game or unpause the game, or it just runs on a strict timer. I think it's underused and should be, like, time should be properly implemented as a mechanic, more or less.
Niklas, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I have to agree, and especially if you look at the possibility as soon as you're working in a digital environment, since the updating in a flash game is, for us at least, we have a lot of doing in the team time. We do the control updates to have that space where players are occupied and not doing too many shenanigans. But in a digital game, since you have the logs, you have the text entries, you can talk to multiple people at the same time in an efficient way. I think it would be really, really interesting to have real-time actions being performed or stuff that's happening, and this is continuously running instead of having it turn-based. You can have automatic flows of income, or you can have some way of like timers automatically. There's a lot of possibility. The only thing to keep in track as soon as you do it is the thing that I mentioned before. The more you do let the system do the automation for you, the harder it gets to change it mid-game without risk of breaking stuff. So then you need to know which parameters am I willing to have changeable and which are fixed. But it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I completely agree, and I think for those of you who have had your work moved to the online format, you've probably noticed the same thing as me. As a regular hour and a half flesh meeting in a conference room usually takes about 20 minutes when you do it online. And I think the reverse is true for Megagames. Interaction takes longer when you wait for other to finish talking. There's in my experience from having looked at a couple of online Megagames now, people tend to let other finish speaking, less interrupting, less hectic discussion, but that also takes longer. So you really have to have a good think about how you align the concept of time across different parts of the game.
Sure. Okay, and then one quick last question for Niklas, which comes from Matthew. What was the most important formula in your space spreadsheets?
Well, to be fair, in the second run, I had a formula that calculated the relations between all transactions based from all ships. So it was a total of, for each ship to each shuttle. So that is, 11 ships, and then also from that shuttle to the 11 ships, and that's a total sum of it. I can post it, but it's really horrible to look at.
So just a massive nested SUMIF.
Yes, and also a lot of imported ranges from other documents and stuff.
Fantastic. All right, well, thanks very much, guys. And thanks, everyone in the audience, for attending. If we can get another round of applause in chat.